I'll just like do this. And then I'll set it.
Okay. If you saw the flyer, you got a lot of background about Susan already. My name's Trish Heek, and I used to work for the Lake Soil and Water Conservation District, where we spent a lot of time getting grants so that we could do wetland and riparian restoration. And the thing that we needed to do in order to do that well was do process-based restoration with somebody who knew what to do to design it so that it would work correctly and be successful. So we got real lucky. We found Susan Firor. At the time was working for Terra Graphics and then moved upstairs from us to Alta, the new name Alta Engineering. But I started working with Susan in 2006. We really started doing some projects, bigger projects in 2008. So Susan's a restoration engineer. Cal Poly Humboldt is her educational background, 2 degrees in environmental engineering. And she's been doing restoration since 1993. We pretty regularly had 1 to 2 projects every year working with Susan and Alta and some of her colleagues there. So it was a really long, productive relationship. You retired too. One of the things that we came to recognize more and more as we were doing the work was that what we really need to do was focus on a process, not create the thing that we wanted. We needed to start the process and let it evolve on its own. So process-based restoration is what we focused on. And then we had a lot of fun, Janet Holy, another colleague, and Susan and I, because we also realized that if we had streams with too much power because of straightening and channelization, that they couldn't support beavers anymore, then we were losing our best restoration engineer. So then we started using some building techniques in channel to slow the water down, to start trapping sediments. And actually, on several of the projects where we put these things called beaver dam analogs in, the beavers started actually building on them. And it did slow the water down enough. And so the other thing that we got to do is trap 26 beavers to relocate them throughout the county in the Potlatch watershed. And they needed to be someplace while we were trapping because we want to get the whole family. And that place was the beaver spa at Susan's place. So with that, I'm glad that you're going to hear about a technique for reducing abundance and competition of canary grass, which you can never get rid of. But
Well, thank you very much, Trish. That was a kind introduction. Let me get my slideshow here. And also, you wanted me to start the video.
Maybe try that. You can just be a little up there.
Yeah, they don't need to see me.
Yeah,
They don't need to see me. Shoot, that's not the interesting thing here. I'm so honored that there we go, that y'all invited me to do this. When I was first asked if I would do this talk, somebody suggested that we call it controlling reed canary grass. And I said, huh. I'm an engineer, but I don't have that much hubris. And so I came up with this, name that maybe is a little bit less sure of myself, because as any of us who've tried to deal with reed canary grass knows, it's not easy. And the success that I've had has been not complete by any means. So I was gonna start by introducing myself, but clearly I don't need to do that because Trish just did such a nice job, and thank you very much for that. I will say that I have a lot of expertise in rivers and wetlands and floodplains. I don't have a lot of expertise in reed canary grass. And in fact, I have no formal training in botany and don't know the first thing about botany. So, but I do have this project that I have done that I'm going to talk about specifically. I call it Crying Creek Wetland Project. Crying Creek is the name that I gave to my little creek, which is a classic Palouse area, tiny little, I think my watershed area is 40 acres. I live on Tier Road, so I named it Crying Creek. And I bought the property in 2005, and there were, as you can see in this picture, 600 linear feet of reed canary grass and nothing else in that little wetland drainage. So what I want to do today is talk about what I did on those 600 linear feet. And then I really just want to, and I'm not going to talk for very long because I don't really have that much to say, but I want to open this up for discussion because I kind of am guessing that a lot of you have tried some level of going toe to toe with reed canary grass. And so maybe we can have a discussion about what's worked for you and so forth. I'm not going to talk about chemical controls because I don't know anything about those either. I didn't use any chemicals. I know that there are chemical controls for reed canary grass that are quite effective, and I would suggest that maybe you talk to Doug Mason if that's something that you're interested in, because he's got a lot of expertise in that area, but I have none. So I'm not, and I didn't use any chemicals on my property. So this was all on my property. I have to give some credit where credit is due and say that this project would not have happened without Trish Egan. She got me excited about it. She taught me everything I know about reed canary grass and a lot of other plants. And she and the Lake Tassel and Water Conservation District supported this project in many, many ways. I also have to give a nod to Tim Keats, who was my husband and who put in a bazillion hours working on this project. Penny was talking about the project that's going on at Phillips Farm, and I've been helping them out a little bit. And I just wanted to say that they also are trying kind of an experiment in controlling reed canary grass out there. And they, I have to say, are being a lot more scientific about it than I was. So I'm going to start with just a little bit that I know about reed canary grass. It is considered to be native to North America, which just frosts my butt. I can't believe anything that this horrible could be native, but I just recently read that probably what we're dealing with is a cultivar that's a kind of a mixture of native and non-native reed canary grass. It loves nitrogen, and I think that might on some level explain why we have had this incredible onslaught of reed canary grass over the last 50 years, as we have put more and more nitrogen into the system in general. There have been some studies recently, people trying to control reed canary grass by doing nitrogen depletion. It's a facultative wetland plant, FACWET, which is its wetland designation. Is there something wrong?
It's not forwarding on Zoom. They may ask you to unshare. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, dear.
Share is-
Okay. All right, we'll start over. Oh, I won't start over, but I'll,
I'm sorry.
no, that's no problem at all. I just have to figure out how to do it.
Stop
First, I got to
sharing.
stop sharing. So you just want me to stop sharing and start sharing again?
Share.
That's
If it
all?
doesn't work,
Okay.
If not, if that doesn't work, we won't worry about it.
Okay. Yeah. So is that working? Yay. Okay. Well, that was an easy fix.
Susan, is it being recorded?
I believe it is being recorded. Yes. Ava is taking care of that. Ava is actually our audio visual specialist this evening. So it's a FAC-wet plant. And what that means is that it's a facultative wetland plant. It prefers to grow in a wetland, but it can grow in drier sites. And so when you see stuff that is maybe a little bit upland and you're not sure, maybe it's smooth brome, maybe it's reed canary grass, it could very well be reed canary grass. It provides excellent erosion control. I would argue too good erosion control. I have always said that reed canary grasses put all the streams in the Palouse in a straitjacket, because it just, once it gets established, it just doesn't allow the stream to fulfill any of its natural processes. I was out on a tour about, I don't know, many years ago with some people with the Forest Service down in the Nez Perce, and they were kind of hanging their heads in shame because they had planted a bunch of reed canary grass. For erosion control back in the day, back before they knew any better. It is known to filter some contaminants and has been used in phytoremediation projects, but I would argue that there are much better native species to use for that, and that's not what we're talking about today anyway. So why is it so invasive? And these are just things that have been, these are just my observations really. In the winter time, as we know, reed canary grass produces a tremendous amount of biomass. And so in the winter, when the snow squishes it all down, it forms this very thick, impenetrable mat of biomass. And so other plants have a very difficult time, germinating and shoots through that mat. It has a very robust root system, and it has rhizomes. It propagates by both seed and rhizome. So if you want to get rid of it, you got to get rid of the whole plant, top to bottom. It's also very cold tolerant in the spring, and so it tends to be the very first thing that pops up in the springtime, and gets a head start on lots of the other natives, on the natives. But it is susceptible to competition, and I have always kind of intended to exploit its one weakness, which is that there are things that compete with reed canary grass. And so the trick is to find out what they are and to give them the head start that they need. So on my little project, I only have 3 acres, and this creek just goes right through the middle. In 2007, Trish arranged for a crew to come plant some plants, and I think they planted 50 plants that day. But it got me started and kind of got me excited about it. They put in mostly hawthorn, and they put in some roses that to this day, I'm not 100% sure they were natives, because they're really, really enthusiastic, let's just say. But starting the next year, as soon as I got that started, starting the next year, I started dreaming up all kinds of different possible treatments that I could try on this property. And so I did try a bunch of different things, and I'll talk to you about some of them in a bit. But I also want to say that my whole experiment was completely unscientific. I had every intention of taking meticulous notes and being really clear about what I was doing. And instead, I just worked and worked and worked. It's a lot of work. But the planting continued and the puttering continued for a number of years. And starting this picture is in 2013. I'm gonna turn the light off for a second, because it started to kind of grow. And here in the fall of 2013, these plants were just starting to, make some headway, and I was pretty excited about that. The puttering continued through 2014, 15, 16. The puttering continues to this day, but I'm not really actively planting anymore. because I have a lot of plants now. But in this case, I was trying to kind of expand a little bit into the upland, get some mix of upland and wetland species planted and have some gardens and get rid of lawn that I was previously mowing. And here is a picture of the exact same view taken in 2006 before this all started and what it looks like today. And I have a few of these pictures. This is another one. This is that very first picture that I showed looking down on the wetland in 2006. And this on the right is what it looks like today. I planted those aspen trees, not the first year at all. That was probably, it was probably 2009 when I planted the first 20 aspen trees, and they're now like 30, 40 feet tall. They're quite lovely. And then this is the same view in 2008. And then this picture I took on the right this spring. So how did I get to this point? So I'm gonna give you just a few of the kind of lessons that I have learned, a few tips, and also talk about some of the things that I'm still really scratching my head about controlling reed canary grass and getting to this really fairly vibrant native ecosystem that I have now. The first is that if you have a job, take May and June off, because you've got a lot of work to do during those 2 months. And the second one is to get yourself a weed whacker that you really like. And I think some Bluetooth headphones are really great these days. You can kind of rock out while you're doing your weed whacking, because you get to do a whole bunch of weed whacking, which may or may not be the best treatment. But I'll say in this picture, this is another picture I took that same time in 2008. And it's fall, you can tell it's fall, things are changing color, and there's no reed canary grass, right? Well, there's a lot of reed canary grass, it's just all been weed whacked. And I tried to keep it really, really on the, as mowed down as I possibly could while these shrubs are getting established in the wetland. You can't just plant plants in reed canary grass and let them fend for themselves. They will lose that competition initially. And so, and there's also the whole problem that we have with ungulates that, they'll just, they'll wreak havoc on, in fact, I still have, moose are still wreaking havoc on my wetland. I have one place that's just a complete mess because like 2 years ago, the moose decided that that was going to be their new thoroughfare, and they just mowed down all of the shrubs that were in that spot. And guess what came back? Yeah. So cages are great. I put a lot of cages. I put cages on every single aspen tree, and I put cages on some of the smaller shrubs as well. They work great. So I want to talk a little bit about tubes and weed mat. So in the upper right-hand corner, you can see, well, no, first I'll talk about tubes. So I used those blue tubes and the salmon colored tubes, and they're advertised as being good browse protection, which is complete malarkey. They don't do anything. In fact, I would say they encourage browse, because the little leaders popped up out there and it's like this tasty little thing sitting there, so they're not good browse protection, but what they are good for is protecting your plants from the weed eater. So you can get in there really fast and get all your weed eating done, and you can hit the blue tubes or the salmon tubes and not wreck your plants. And actually, I found that to be a really huge benefit. So I'm in favor of tubes for that reason only. And then weed mats. So the couple things that I tried for in terms of weed mat were in the upper right-hand corner, I'd scalp around each plant before I planted it and then put down a little square of weed mat. And I would say that after looking back on this for 15 years, it was a complete waste of weed mat. I don't see any difference between the ones that I did the squares of weed mat and the ones that I didn't. So forget about that. But on the left here, so this is an interesting picture. And not because I'm there with my butt up in the air, but because the main channel is over there where I am in this picture. And there's I just had a big, low-lying, very soggy area off to the side. And so I cut it down with a lawnmower, weed whacker, as close as I could to the ground, and then covered it with weed mat. And then I cut little X's in the weed mat, and I planted sedge and bulrush plugs. Scirpus microcarpus is the plant of the year for me. I planted a lot of small fruited bulrush in it, and it did well. But lots and lots of sedge in there. And you can see there's a few shrubs that have cages or tubes around them, but mostly it was sedges. And so right after this picture was taken, I stood up and I walked over. This was taken 1 year after I did that. I probably did the weed mat and the planting in the summertime, and this was the following spring. And I walked over and I noticed that the weed mat was all puffy. You can see in this picture, it's puffy. And I thought, oh no, it's all red canary grass under there. And I pulled open the weed mat, and guess what was under there? Sedge, solid sedge. It was beautiful. It was the best day I had in a long, long time. And so I ripped up all the weed mat, and there was just sedge everywhere. It was a miracle. So, so for that purpose and doing it like this, I really do recommend the weed mat. But weed mat you can buy, and it says it's like 1 year or 3 years or 20 years, right? And I think that for every year, it just means they put a whole bunch more plastic in it, right? So it's awful stuff. And if I had it to do again, I would use entirely paper, plant-based weed mat. It's gonna last plenty long. I'm still ripping up a ton of weed mat from my yard 15 years later, and it's just, it's garbage. It served a good purpose, but I think that this stuff would work just as well and be a lot easier on the environment. So shade. For many, many years, I've walked around telling my clients as a restoration engineer that the way they need to control their reed canary grass is to get more shrubs to shade out the reed canary grass. And I still believe that, sort of. In this picture on the left, there's no reed canary grass in amongst all those shrubs, right? Those shrubs are really thick. There's spirea and dogwood, and there's some hawthorn in there. It's thick. It's so thick that not one single photon reaches the ground. But this picture on the right, and this is my near where my sedge garden is, and there you saw that I had planted near where all that sedge was. I planted a couple of aspen trees, right, and a couple of other things. Where there is sparse shade, it shades out the sedges, and they are weakened, and the reed canary grass scoops in and takes over. And that's what we've got going here. It's aspen trees and reed canary grass underneath them. And so, I think my next picture is a better example of this. So this is my beautiful sedge garden, right? It's all the foreground is just solid sedges. And as soon as you get back there where there's some woodies, a few woodies and a little bit of shade, the reed canary grass is back and the sedges are gone. So what I need, I think, I'm still working on this. This year, I pulled up off the left, there's 2 big clumps of Red Canary grass. I pulled them all up by hand. So we'll see what happens next year, if it just comes back or what. But what I kind of think I need to do at this point is go back in there, weed whack all that Red Canary grass right down to the nubbins, put down more weed mat and plant something that is a little bit shade tolerant. So I'm kind of looking for some suggestions from you guys who are actual plant experts, because I'm not. But in the front part of this garden, it's a mixture of different sedge species. There's a little bit of juncus, rushes, and there's quite a bit of that scirpus of bulrush. So it's been a lot of hard work, and I keep telling people it's simple, but it's not easy. You don't get to just wave your magic wand and get rid of Red Canary grass. Otherwise, none of you guys would be here, right? But when you do have successes, it's a wonderful thing, and it makes you feel great. And I would like to open this up now for questions and discussion. I did put this picture in here just because it was cute. This is about, I would say, probably during the second year of this project. And I had those little squares of weed mat everywhere. And these 4 coyote pups in the middle of the day, broad daylight, came into the yard and started ripping up those pieces of weed mat and then chasing each other all around my yard, trying to steal the weed mat from each other. So that was the one really great thing that came from the squares of weed mat. Otherwise, it wasn't really worth anything else. So I'm sorry, I don't have, like the answer. I just don't. But this is what I've learned, and I am going to keep after it, and I am happy to help out if anybody wants to kind of talk about what they want to do or what they think they might do on their property, or we could, and I'd like to just open it up for discussion and questions at this point.
Yes. Susan, on the place where you had all the black bags.
Yeah.
And you have said describe it. Oh, is it black? About in summertime, still all the Canary grass, and then the sedge just came up. But that's what I'm seeing you about, because you said that you brought the paper mark as well. Like,
Oh, because of the color black?
because these are the black.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had, no.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is Red Canary grass would never be that wimpy. Are you kidding? A little bit of black plastic? No, I just don't think that would have, I mean, it might have set it back. And I do think it set it back enough so that those sedges that I had planted were able to just spread and go crazy under there. So, but I think that anything that just kept the sunlight out, I could be wrong about that, but I think that that's true. Yes. Seed viability. I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody know how long we can? Probably for like 7,000 years. I mean, just knowing this stuff, right? I don't know though. Like I said, I'm no botanist, but there are a bunch of botanists in this room. So if anybody does know the answer to these questions, please feel free. Yeah. No, my aspen are good. My aspen grove has tripled in size. Yeah, she asked if the Red Canary grass keeps the aspen from sprouting, and no, not at all. The only problem I have with aspens is that the new sprouts aren't in cages, and so the deer just have their way with them. The deer are the worst. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that in terms of weakening it, but for me, the goal was to keep it from heading out, to keep that seed from happening. And also just to keep it from developing that huge biomass. So really the heavy weed whacking season was just like everything, May and June. So that's why you have to take May and June off. And I probably weed whacked every 2 weeks during May and June for a few years, for probably, yeah. And then again, later in the season, maybe once or twice in July and August. Yeah. Just because that's when there's all the growth is going on. Yes, Ava.
There's a question online here, so.
Okay.
Maybe you can question.
Yes.
The question there is, what do you think the sedges
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. The question is, why do I think those sedges did so well under the weed mat, but are so susceptible to shade, clearly? I have no idea. I wish I knew. It was the very first year I had planted these plugs, and I planted a plug probably every 2 feet. But when I ripped open that weed mat, there was a plant every 4 inches. And it's like some magic happened under there. I wish I knew what it was, because I could probably patent it, make millions. Yeah. Yes. That was early. It was early in this. It was in, probably early May. But it was really puffed up, and it was like, if I didn't pull the weed mat off, I felt like the sedge was going to die. Yeah. So it was just that very first flush in the spring of just tons and tons of sedge. Yes.
Was it green or teal?
It was a little punky looking, but it was green and looked healthy. But yeah, it wasn't as green as the stuff that was in the X's. I know. I thought you guys could tell me. That's why I'm here. Yes.
Did you plant camas, or did that kind of come in on?
I did plant camas. Yeah, I did. No, during this whole time, I was, working, doing lots of restoration, and Trish was always coming over to me and bringing me camas bulbs when we were out in the field. And so I would take them home and stuff them in the ground in my wetland. So yeah, I have a lovely little camas garden now. And that one, it's like the most wonderful thing to come home to have a camas like that smiling at you. Does anybody have any ideas for me for my slightly shade tolerant wetland plant that I need? Chickens. Well,
I mean, like where your aspen are?
yeah, aspen. There are a bunch of other shrubs. There's
Spirea, maybe under.
Yeah. I don't.
Because, then that would keep the, it can't, the sedge can't tolerate the shade, so
But the spirea can.
They will get rid of
And it'll come in really thick. No, that's a great idea, Craig.
I just wonder, I've had trouble with it in frost pockets.
With the spirea. Yeah.
But it didn't kill it all the way.
It just knocks it
it'll
back.
ding it.
Yeah.
There are several different kinds of spirea that grow in the forest.
Yeah. It's true. I've seen it a lot up north in Silver Valley. Lots of spirea in the forested wetlands. Yeah. True. Yep. Yeah. That's what I've seen. Trish.
I said that there are several spireas that grow along the North Fork of the Coeur d'Alene.
they're glacea, but there's then the other one that's kind of a bush with pink flowers. I can't remember a species name. Yeah. and
There's a Douglas spirea. I always thought the stuff that I have in my yard, I think is Douglas spirea. Yeah.
glacea.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I've seen it most too, is I've done quite a lot of work in the Silver Valley, and there's a lot of spirea in like on the margins of the wetlands in the Silver Valley.
The Petrifolia is the one that grows here, but what's the one along the river up there that has a big pink bloom?
That round pink,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know what that one
I
is.
can't think of the species. Yes, it's a beautiful one.
Yeah,
But you don't see it down here now. You know,
right.
Did the moose or deer graze on any of this spirea, or did they leave it alone?
All of my spirea is gone now, and I don't think it was primarily the moose. I think it was mostly, you remember about 2 or 3 years ago, we had a really early snowstorm that brought down a lot of branches because everything still had leaves on it. Yeah, I unfortunately also have lots and lots of poplar on my property, and when that snowstorm happened, it just, all this poplar came down and kind of crushed all my spirea. So I can sort of imagine the moose being tough on them, but that spirea one, you know, before that, when I planted it, it did great, and I didn't have any problems with moose bothering it at all.
glacea likes to have its feet.
Yeah,
Likes to be in the ditch.
yes, it does. It's definitely it's another facultative wetland plant.
How do you
Yes,
keep-
Pin.
How do you control the poplar sprouting? We have a terrible
Oh,
problem.
it's horrible. Lawnmower. Yeah, I just mow and mow and mow. They're horrible. Yeah. I mean, they're wonderful. They're beautiful big trees, but they are
Ours is
very,
all
very
over.
invasive. Yeah. Penny.
I was just gonna ask you to repeat the question so we could hear. So
Oh,
I
she,
didn't hear Nancy's.
oh, I'm sorry. She asked how do I control the poplar in my yard? And the answer is I don't. I mow it. I have to mow and mow and mow. I can go like this time of year, if I don't mow for 2 weeks, I'll have poplars this tall in my yard. It's crazy. Yes.
There's another question online here.
Okay.
What cattails were they rubbing the same water conditions as the Canary, or will they be in older?
Yeah, so I don't have any cattails on my property, and that's sort of by design because cattails are also a little bit enthusiastic, shall we say. But I do have them, there are a bunch in the roadside ditches along Tier Road where I live. And they don't really seem to, you know, every now and then a bunch will kind of pop up for a while. And then the red canary grass comes in and kind of takes over again. So I don't think that unless you, and I've had this problem on other constructed wetland projects that I've done professionally, where cattails will kind of get a start and they'll do one of two things. Either the red canary grass will come get them, or else they'll take over the entire wetland. And so I tend to sort of stay away from them for that reason. There are places where, you know, if I had a pond, for example, I would definitely consider putting cattails around the edge of the pond. Yeah.
We have both cattails and red canary grass, and it's that they're growing interlinked.
Together.
And what it seems is that the red canary grass hasn't taken the cattails. And let the area get wetter and bigger. It seems that the deeper the water, the more the cattails like it.
Yeah.
And that the red canary grass is more along.
Around the edges, that
where
makes
it's not
sense.
quite as deep,
Yeah.
or as wet as much of the year.
Yeah. So she's saying that the cattails seem to prefer the deeper water, which does make perfect sense. They're actually an obligate wetland species, so they really have to have water to survive. Yes, Ronnie.
I see, right, and, roadside ditches, green canary grass, but sections where with any amount of water, the cattails don't allow the green canary grass in, including the little 600-foot section creek that I'm thinking.
Yeah.
The green canary grasses and the rose bushes are the only ones that only species persist. The thorn trees grow up, but without spreading in the green canary
Yeah.
branches. And those are the only other plants in that creek. The
Yeah.
other part of it is in agricultural settings, where the fields on both sides. The green canary grass is grows in there completely.
Right.
Because the vegetation was removed totally.
Yeah.
In the situation. Nothing else. So, I mean, other species, the other species that seem to work. Dogwood.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that really thick stuff on my property is red osier dogwood. It does great. There's a couple great things about red osier dogwood. It grows, it's fast growing, and you can, buy plants, but you can also take cuttings, and I've done zillions of just cut a piece and stuff it in, cut a piece and stuff it in, and they grow like crazy. So they're a very economical plant, but they're and they're very thick. And once again, if you get one photon hitting the ground, the red canary grass is going to come back. So the dogwood is great for that because it grows so thickly. But yeah, I think that what you guys are saying about the cattails, that it's really, you got to have standing water for cattails to survive. And most of our little intermittent streams, my creek is dried up now. It's completely dry. And it stayed wet a little longer this year, but it typically is dry by mid-July or so. Yeah.
For those dogwood, did you need to have you're trying to get some going in an area that has a lot of green canary grass? Are you going to be putting down some kind of weed mat for it to get started? Just walk along and stick things in the ground and have it outcompete the.
Yeah, so for planting dogwood plants, I scalp. So I remove as much of the root mass of the red canary grass as I can around the plant. And I plant the plant and I put a tube on it, and I weed whack that red canary grass back to keep it from, because it'll outcompete the dogwood initially. As far as the cuttings are concerned, I never put cuttings anywhere outside the really wet part of my channel. So mostly because it's hard to stick them in the ground. But where the, it's got to be nice and wet to actually get them stuck in the ground, because you got to stick them in pretty far. And you don't really want a ton of the stem sticking up above the ground after you've stuffed them in there. So stick them in, if you can get them down a foot and then just have 6 inches of stem above ground, they seem to do best. But I've never, and in the main part of right in my tiny little channel that's this wide, I don't have red canary grass growing, right? Where it doesn't do well under high hydraulic pressure. Just like the scirpus, you can't get really any graminoid to grow in high hydraulic pressure. from my experience. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Legionnaire,
Yeah.
I've only been doing it for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
but the majority of here
Mm-hmm.
was wrong. But it's just starting to ground.
Yeah. It does do very well as a steak, a live steak. I know you haven't had a lot of success with hawthorn, but I did. I have a really very vibrant hawthorn community in my wetland, and I am quite grateful for it because I think that it does discourage the ungulates a little bit. They like to eat it when it's young, but once it gets to be about eye height and starts poking in the eyes, I think they stop going in there. So. It's hard to get hawthorn established because the ungulates like to eat it so much when it's really young. But once it gets to be over about 3 feet tall, it does great. Yes, Ava, another
question.
okay.
Online.
Uh-huh.
Have you done a soil pit to compare the areas where you have the sedges and rushes compared to where you have the canary grass to see if there's a difference in depth of water table? So this is Craig Madsen wondering if it's about shade or some other factors in the soil that might
Right. I have not done any soil testing per se, so I don't know if there's a difference in the soil composition or structure or anything like that. But I do know that the water table is very similar. It's just flat, and the water table is the same all the way across that flat spot. I mean, it's no bigger than this room. It's not a big area. But there may very well be other confounding factors that I haven't considered, and that, that might be one of them. Yes.
Just going to share that one way that we were able to plant cuttings
Uh-huh.
for them from your place.
Right.
On ours, outside of the wet,
Uh-huh.
narrow drainage,
Yeah.
was we built a T-bar that was just a piece of rebar with a handle on it.
Uh-huh. Oh
And in
yeah.
that early
Like a
time of
dibble.
spring, yeah, where you can go
Yeah.
out, then you could get your swath of where you're planting a lot wider,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes deeper.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of success with that, with kind of like making sure we're spreading those plants out in the wider,
Out across
wider
the-
area. And
yeah.
it's still really easy at the early spring.
In spring. Yeah.
You couldn't really plant anything between those, but it was still wet, it was still easy and good.
Great idea. Yes, Trish.
Okay, I have some suggestions for interspersing with your aspen.
Yeah.
Two plants that I see, legacy plants coming up in the parent grass are small fruited bulrush and cow parsnip.
Yep.
Established cow parsnip will give you a lot of shade there.
Yep.
And it's part of Dogmare's described habitat type, which is aspen over hawthorn and cow parsnip.
Oh, interesting. I do have some cow parsnip that I just scattered some seeds and got cow parsnip to grow underneath my aspen trees. So I'll try more of that. Great, thank you.
And once you scalp the regenerative grass, if you want to put some native wetland grasses in that are somewhat aggressive,
Uh-huh,
meadow barley, middle grass,
uh-huh.
right out of next year. And just because it comes up so quickly and establishes root system, it gives it some competition.
Mm-hmm.
And the native agrostis, I can't remember how many right now, but it's and then what about Pacific Ninebark?
Yeah, I planted a bunch of Pacific Ninebark, probably a bunch of plants that you gave me. And they did really well for about 2 or 3 years, and then they died.
These plants, but not cuttings.
Plants, yeah. And I don't really, sure.
Okay.
You know me, I'll try anything once. Well, thank you all. These have been wonderful questions, and thanks for the discussion and the ideas. Yeah, and if anybody wants to talk to me about stuff in the future, Penny has my email address, and you're welcome to share it with people.
Sure, Susan, will stay for a few more minutes if you have some questions, but